The speedometer needle oscillated in a constant rhythm, following the slight muffled roar of the engine. The car glided down the lonely strip of road, shining its headlights just a few feet ahead. A corridor of light that seemed to float above, an infinite sea of darkness. All around there was nothing. No posts, no houses, no sound, other than the engine itself and the friction of the tires on the cold asphalt. Marcos kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road as if it could disappear at any moment. He had been awake for hours, crossing small towns, running away from something he himself couldn't name. Maybe it was just the silence that disturbed him. Maybe it was the total absence of everything. The radio had not emitted a signal for some time, just static, and now, not even that. Completely silenced, as if he had given up trying to find a living frequency. He had already changed stations, reconnected cables, even tapped the panel lightly to no avail. Nothing. Just emptiness. Tried. The cell phone. No signal. Black screen. Restarted. Still. No connection. No GPS. The network bar appeared to have been ripped from the top corner of the screen. It was as if he had come out from under the sky and entered another place. Outside, the night was thick, dense as if it had weight. The light from the headlights found no end, only the limit of the light itself. There was no sign of life, no insects, no sound of wind in the trees. It was like driving through a tunnel with no walls, a space without time. He rubbed his eyes, tiredly. He had been behind the wheel for more than 4 hours. He must have already crossed some city, some intersection, a truck in the other direction, any sign that the world still worked as it should. But there was only darkness. The road seemed to repeat itself. The same smooth curves, the same continuous track, the same thin bush on the banks. Sometimes I swore I saw a large rock on the left side, but it would appear again 20 minutes later, in the same spot, like an intrusive memory. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:14, always 2:14. It didn't matter how many times I looked. Marcos let out a sigh and spoke out loud just to break the silence. "What the fuck is this place?" His voice sounded strange inside the cabin, as if it had come from another body, as if it no longer belonged to him. And then up ahead, in the midst of the endless darkness, a light appeared, weak at first, then clearer. A sign illuminated in blue, a lonely gas station, like an island planted in the middle of nowhere. The structure looked old but alive. The light vibrated like a silent invitation. Marcos narrowed his eyes. I was sure I had been there before. Marcos no longer knew how long he had been driving. The digital marker on the dashboard was still immutable, set at 2:14 as if time had frozen. And the strangest thing, he didn't remember slowing down or speeding up at any point. The speed was always the same, 75 an hour, as if the car was stuck in an invisible gear that didn't obey your command. The curves were gone. The road went straight, in a continuous line, without any variation in relief or landscape. Nothing on the right, nothing left, not a plaque, not a fork, not even a sign of deterioration in the asphalt, such as holes or tire marks. He began to observe the sky. It was dark, yes, as expected at dawn, but it wasn't normal darkness. The stars had disappeared. The moon, too. The sky looked like an opaque ceiling, too black, too thick, as if it were covered by a dark cloth stretched over the world. There was no depth, no shadow, just a block of darkness hanging over your head. At one point, he turned off the headlights on impulse. He wanted to see how much darkness still surrounded him. And the result was immediate. A complete void. No natural light source. It was as if he was driving through a black tunnel, where the light only existed while the car was running. When he turned on the headlights again, he felt a chill run up his back. The road appeared again, and with it, the same low vegetation. On the sides, the same bushes, the same small hill in the distance. The repetition was too perfect to be a coincidence. "This isn't a road at all," he murmured, as if verbalizing it could bring him back to reality. The air inside the car was thicker. Breathing seemed to require more effort. My skin was sweating. Even with the cold air coming from the ventilation outlets, silence was no longer a detail. It was a weight, an invisible cloak that suffocated everything, even our own thoughts. Tried to make a turn. He turned the steering wheel slowly to the right, then to the left, but the car wouldn't swerve. The track continued straight, as if you were on invisible trails. He turned off the radio, turned it on again, pressed all the buttons. Nothing. No noise, no music, no response. He looked at his cell phone again. No signal. The GPS showed a straight line, with no beginning or end, with the position of his car stopped in the center. The indicator arrow no longer moved. It was frozen, as if he had been standing still, although the speedometer still showed 75 per hour. "This isn't normal," he said now in a loud, firm voice. And then, the thought that had been slowly growing since he entered that road came clearly to him. He was no longer in normal time. I was no longer on the right road. It was somewhere else, trapped in a suspended space, as if reality had forgotten about him. As if he had left the road and entered something that imitated the world but did not belong to it. On the dark horizon, a bluish light appeared like a whisper of hope. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, like a deceptive reflection. But as Marcos advanced along the straight and infinite road, the light became clearer, more present. Soon, a sign stood out in the darkness, faded white letters that said, "Auto Posto Esperanza." "Finally," he murmured, with restrained relief. It was a simple old gas station. 2 metal awnings covered the gas pumps, and a small convenience store lay next to it, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. There were no other cars, no sign of movement. Still, the place felt alive, as if it was waiting for him. Marcos stopped, next to the nearest pump. The still hot engine vibrated slightly under the hood. He turned off the car and got out, immediately feeling the cold early morning air. The silence in the place was absolute. The absence of sound was so intense that he could hear his own footsteps on the concrete, the zipper of his coat moving, and even the sound of his heart racing. He went to the store, but before entering, he glanced at the reflective glass in the window. His stomach dropped. On the other side, perfectly reflected in the glass, was him, fueling a car identical to yours on the other side of the pump, paralyzed. He immediately turned around, facing the point where the reflection indicated that the other him should be. But nothing. Nobody. The station was completely empty. He looked at the window again. Now the reflection showed only himself. Alone. The heart was beating hard. He tried to dismiss the thought of déjà vu as extreme tiredness. I had been driving for hours. Maybe I was hallucinating. He paid for the fuel, got back in the car, started the engine, and got out of there as quickly as he could. For a few minutes, the road looked different. 1 or 2 curved sections appeared. The vegetation changed a little. He began to believe that he had finally escaped. But then, the blue light appeared again. The same sign. The same post. Auto Posto Esperanza. He stopped, astonished. The station looked identical in every detail. The same dirt on the glass, the same bomb crossed out, the same flashing light at the store entrance. Marcos no longer knew whether to scream or cry. He continued driving, accelerating, ignoring the dashboard, the frozen time, the silent radio. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find something different. Anything. But it didn't take long. The blue light appeared once again. The third. Marcos let out a nervous laugh. This isn't happening. He stopped the car in front of the gas station, his fingers shaking on the steering wheel. In the glass of the store, the reflection showed himself. But this time the other one was smiling and refueling, as if he was used to it, as if he knew that Marcos would never get out of there. Marcos entered the convenience store with cautious steps, his eyes scanning the environment as if looking for cracks in reality. The door opened with a slight hydraulic hiss, and an overly clean smell immediately hit his nose, something between disinfectant and new plastic. The floor glowed almost unnaturally, reflecting the cool white of the overhead lights. The shelves were perfectly organized, symmetrical, with products stacked as if they had never been touched. The store was too clean, sterile. Ambient music played low, but it was impossible to ignore. It was a gentle instrumental melody, but disconcerting, with repetition. 3 main notes, always in the same cycle. There was no chorus. There was no climax. Just repetition. A sound loop trapped in time. Marcos approached the counter. The attendant was there. A middle-aged man, with precisely parted hair, an impeccable white shirt under his blue vest. He smiled as soon as Marcos stopped in front of the cashier. "Good evening, sir. Do you want to fill up on fuel?" The voice was polite, Clara, but the tone was too dry, as if each word was pronounced at the exact time, without emotion. Marcos swallowed. "I already filled up, I just came to pay." "Excellent. Do you want to pay by cash or card?" asked the attendant, without changing his expression 1 millimeter. Marcos held out the card. The attendant took it with an exact gesture, inserted it into the machine, pressed the buttons, handed it back. "Thanks. Do you want an invoice?" "No, everything is fine." "Excellent. Have a great night, sir." Same smile, same stare, no blinks. Marcos took a step back. He looked around the store. In the background there was another attendant, absolutely identical to the first. Same haircut, same vest. He was replacing cans on a shelf with meticulously identical movements. He would pick up the can, turn it, position it, repeat. A perfect cycle, no breaks, no errors. He turned to leave, but the music caught his attention. That melody, that same sequence. He looked up. A small radio attached to the wall flickered slightly, and something chilled him from the inside out. The radio had no wires, no visible feeding, and the music was a little louder than before, or maybe it was closer, as if being played inside your head. He left the store, crossed the fuel pump, and headed towards the car with hurried steps. Before entering, he looked at the illuminated sign, Autoposto Esperanza. Same shade of blue, same letters missing ink, but something had changed. The counter attendant was now outside, and waved at him. "Have a great night, sir." Marcos got into the car, started the engine, and accelerated without thinking. I needed to get out of there. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the 2 attendants returning inside the store. At the same pace, same step, same posture. And for the first time, he felt that that position didn't exist in the real world. It was part of the place where he was trapped. Part of the cycle. Part of it. Marcos stepped on the accelerator, the car's engine roaring against the wet asphalt as he left the gas station behind. The feeling of déjà vu still throbbed in his mind, like an echo that was impossible to ignore. He didn't look in the rearview mirror this time. He didn't want to see the reflection. He didn't want to see himself filling up an identical car. I just wanted to get out of there. He drove for minutes that seemed like hours, his hands sweaty, on the steering wheel, his eyes wide at the dark of the road. The same road, always straight, without intersections, without signs, without the slightest sign of change. Even the surrounding trees seemed to be stuck in a cycle, repeated like a poorly programmed scenario. He tried to turn the car. He turned around. He would go back the way he came, even if he had to drive all night. But the darkness around was still the same. Time frozen at 2:14. The feeling of displacement was so strong that he no longer knew if he was going or coming back. Everything was the same. Everything was wrong. Suddenly, there it was again, the same blue glow in the distance. The sign, Autoposto Esperanza. Marcos stopped the car in the middle of the track, in disbelief. He was breathing heavily. His hands shook on the steering wheel. How could I be back? He turned around, drove straight for miles, but there it was. Again. The post looked identical. The pumps, the awnings, the lit store. But there was something different. Small, but real. One of the posters stuck in the store window, an advertisement for a soft drink promotion, was torn, as if someone had tried to tear it off in a hurry. It was the same poster as the previous time, but now broken in half. Marcos continued driving. It didn't stop. He made another forced curve in the road and launched himself at high speed, exceeding 90. He almost lost control on a non-existent curve, but the car remained steady. Another 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes passed, although the clock still said 2:14. And there he was, the same post. But now, one of the attendants was standing outside, watching the road before Marcos even arrived, as if I knew he would come back. Marcos got out of the car. He walked to the store. He smelled the same overly clean smell, the same song. But the attendant didn't greet him. He didn't even smile. He just looked at him, and he blinked slowly, as if he was tired of repeating that. Can I help you, sir?" he said in the same programmed tone as before, but now with a slight slur in his words, almost exhausted. Marcos didn't respond. He left and went back to the car, drove longer, hours maybe, until the fuel starts to run low. Until despair became a second heart beating in the chest. He tried to leave on foot. He walked along the side of the road for miles. The trees seemed to be watching him. There was no sound of wind or animals. The entire world seemed contained, as if trapped in glass. When he returned to the starting point, the post was there. But now the price of gasoline was different, more expensive. And the two attendants wore sunglasses, even under white lights. With each cycle, something changed, as if the place was adapting, as if something, or someone, was testing your resistance. Marcos entered the convenience store again, guided by an impulse that he no longer understood. The attendants were still there, motionless behind the counter, with their impeccable vests and expressionless faces. The ambient music repeated the same melody as always, the three notes echoing as a reminder that time, inside, did not move. But something was pulling him towards the back of the store. It was as if there was a strange magnetism behind the perfectly organized shelves, the silent corridors where no soul ever passed. There, against the back wall, a refrigerator displayed rows upon rows of perfectly aligned drinks, all with the labels facing forward, as if they had never been touched. Marcos approached slowly. The cold light from the refrigerator illuminated him from below, creating shadows on his face and accentuating the lines of exhaustion. He stopped in front of the glass door and instinctively looked at his reflection, and the blood ran cold in his veins. He was there. Yes. But I wasn't alone. The image of his car parked outside was clearly reflected in the glass of the door. But in the reflection, there was a second him. A man identical in every detail. The same clothes, the same haircut, the same rain-damp coat. The copy fueled the car with slow, methodical movements, as if it were acting out a routine it had learned by heart. But the worst was yet to come. Marcos's reflection kept his head slightly lowered. When he looked up to stare at the glass, the other's eyes also looked up, and they were completely black. No iris, no white, just two opaque empty spheres, as deep as holes in reality itself. A look that reflected nothing, not light, not emotion, not humanity, just the vacuum. The real Marcos took a step back, his heart beating so hard that the sound echoed in his ears. But in the reflex, the other Marcos continued the movement, slow, precisely identical to the previous gesture. As if I were stuck in a cycle that I didn't react to, it just repeated, until suddenly he stopped and smiled. Not a natural smile. It was a strange, forced curve that widened more than it should have. The corners of the reflection's mouth stretched beyond what was possible, transforming the expression into something close to a cut. Marcos staggered, turned his back to the refrigerator, and reflexively looked at the store window, the one that faced the gas station's runway. The car was there, but there was no one near him, or was there? For an instant, he swore he saw a dark silhouette standing next to the car, with the same features, the same posture, looking directly at the store. He closed his eyes tightly, taking a deep breath. But when he opened them, the attendants were closer than before. One of them, now inside the counter, was looking at him with slightly opaque eyes. "Sir, do you want anything else?" Marcos didn't respond, because he was no longer sure if he was the one there. Marcos lost control. The terror had evolved from silent disorientation to visceral panic. He felt as if he were surrounded by invisible walls, pushed against a truth that his mind refused to accept. The reflection, that other him, with eyes like a bottomless pit, had moved independently, and now everything was too wrong to ignore. He marched up to the counter, his heavy footsteps reverberating against the too-clean floor. The store's lights buzzed, the ambient melody followed its eternal cycle, and the two attendants remained static, like decorative pieces. Marcos hit the counter hard. "What is this here?" he shouted. "Where am I? What did you do to me?" No response. "Talk to me." He punched the counter again, and the nearest attendant's eyes moved. For a second, the head turned almost mechanically, like a disjointed puppet. "Do you want an invoice?" Marcos backed away, panting. The second attendant turned around as well. Same tone of voice, same expression. "Do you want an invoice?" he screamed, pushed the shelf next to him, knocking over bottles that fell with a muffled crash. But the sound did not echo. He died in the air, as if he had been absorbed by the environment. No glass shattered, no bottles broke. The attendant stood motionless, frozen, as if turned off. The music stopped. The buzzing of the lights stopped. The store fell into an unnatural silence, and it was then that Marcos saw, through the reflection of the broken refrigerator, now with the glass cracked inside, that the other him outside was still moving, but not like before. He walked towards the store, slowly, no rush. Marcos ran outside, tripping on the threshold of the automatic door that no longer opened on its own. He pushed with his shoulders, went out into the light rain, his eyes scanning the track. The other one was no longer in sight, but the car was different, as if he had aged in seconds. The faded paintwork, the slightly deflated tires, the bodywork full of rust stains. It wasn't possible. It was the same car, but it wasn't the same time. Marcos let out a primal scream, grabbed a gas pump and pulled with all his might. The metal structure shook but did not let go. In an impulse of desperation, he ran to the store again, ripped up shelves, kicked the counter, knocked over a display. "End it!" he shouted. "I am not him! I am not you!" The lights flickered. Everything shook. A sharp noise cut through the air, like the sound of a world falling apart. And then, silence. When Marcos opened his eyes, he was sitting at the wheel, the engine off, the radio playing the soft melody from before, everything clean, perfect, untouched. Outside, the station shined as always, Auto Posto Esperanza. He passed his hand over his face, shakily. The clock on the dashboard read 2:14 again. In the glass of the store, the reflection watched him, and this time, the reflection raised its hand first, and he waved. The rain had stopped. Marcos stepped on the brakes slowly, the car sliding to a stop in front of the familiar sign. Neon lights flickered pale blue, casting a ghostly glow over the wet asphalt. Auto Posto Esperanza. The words no longer had the same weight. They were just a warning, a cruel reminder that the end, or the beginning, would always be there. He turned off the engine, or at least he thought he did. The car was silent before he even touched the key. He looked around, trying to find any sign of life. There was no sound, no voice, not even the buzzing lights or the eternal soundtrack. He got out of the car. The tires hit the ground with that same muffled sound as every other time. But something was different, something deeper than the other subtle changes. The station was empty. Completely. The lights were on, the store was lit, but there were no attendants, not a single living soul nearby. The gas pump where it always stopped was in the same place, but the nozzle was hanging, dripping slowly, as if someone had just used it, as if he had just filled up the gas himself. But I didn't remember that. The tank was full. The car's dashboard showed the fuel level at maximum, and the key was in the contact. He hadn't put it there. The heart started to speed up. The eyes instinctively sought the glass of the store. The window perfectly reflected the environment, as it always did. But inside, or rather on the other side of the reflection, he was still there. The other, he, stopped. Property. Same coat. Same face. Even everything. But now, smiling. Not a kind smile. Not a gesture of joy. It was too wide a smile, too strange, as if it was made by someone who just saw others smile and tried to imitate it. The black eyes shone with an inhuman intensity, as if the reflection were more alive than he was. Marcos took a step back, then another. The window did not return the movement. The reflection remained, stopped, smiling, and slowly he raised his hand. He showed a key, just like his, identical. Marcos turned to the car. The key was still in the ignition, the engine off. The bench adjusted to your height. All very well, all ready. But he didn't remember doing any of that. A wind blew through the metal structures of the station, dragging an old piece of paper that flew to his feet. It was a supply receipt. Name, Marcos 5. Time, 2:14 a.m. He dropped the paper, turned one last time to the store. Now the reflection was no longer there. The glass reflected only emptiness, or maybe. He had already come out the other side. Without knowing why, Marcos got into the car. The key turned by itself. The engine started without any noise, and he followed. Like always. Understood. Below is the corrected text, narrative and cohesive with the style of previous scripts, adapted to the AI narration format, without visual terms such as camera or scene. Marcos started the car one last time. The engine responded smoothly, as if nothing had happened. The panel showed the tank full, the ideal temperature, no alert. It was as if everything was in order, as if all those repetitions, all the turns around, all the distorted reflections had never existed. But he knew something had touched him, something that didn't belong to the world he knew, something that now lived inside him. The road ahead was the same, straight, dark, without signs, without noise. He drove for a few minutes in silence, waiting for the inevitable. And when blue light appeared once again on the horizon, he was not surprised. He just accepted it. The sign flickered as always. Auto Posto Esperanza. But this time, when he parked, he didn't get out. He just stood there, stopped at the wheel, his eyes fixed on the brightly lit store, waiting for the moment when the reflection would appear. And it appeared. His other self was there, property, observing. The same faint smile, eyes as dark as the night around them. He didn't move. It didn't need to. Marcos took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and then he realized. On the other sides of the station, not just in front of the pump where it was, there were other cars, all the same as yours. Parked, refueling, waiting. In each of them, an identical man. Same face, same tired expression, same increasingly empty eyes. Some were inside the cars, with their heads down. Others outside, working with the bomb, as if they had just arrived. And in some, nothing was left, as if they had emptied themselves. All Marcos were stuck in the same cycle, repeating the same gestures, like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to them. From the radio, which until then had remained silent, a voice emerged. Weak at first, but soon filling the entire cabin space. It wasn't shouted. She wasn't aggressive. It was just, right. You never left here. The phrase was repeated, coming from all sides, multiplied in identical whispers, as if each version of him said the same thing at the same time. You never left here. Marcos looked once again at the store. Glass, and in reflex his other self slowly raised his hand, pointing at him. The gesture was calm, definitive. He knew what it meant. It was the end of the road, or perhaps the true beginning. And at that moment, the engine turned off on its own. The bomb light went out. The ambient music restarted from the same point. Everything started again, because there at Autoposto Esperanza, time was not moving forward. It just came back. Always. The headlights cut through the darkness of the road like two pale spears, cutting through the thick pitch of dawn. The asphalt seemed to have no end, sliding beneath the tires with an almost hypnotic fluidity. Outside, everything was silent. No wind, no insects, no other vehicles. The road was hers, just hers. Inside the car, the engine purred at a steady pace, filling the void with a deep, monotonous sound. The air conditioning blew a light breeze that kept the cabin cool enough to keep your eyes open. The woman, sitting with her shoulders hunched and her left hand resting on the steering wheel, looked ahead attentively, but her mind wandered. It was already late, much more than should be on the road. She didn't come back from a party or work. Not exactly. It was an escape. Of the city, of a conversation, of a memory that insisted on returning every time I tried to sleep. Insomnia had become a habit, and the road, a kind of refuge. Driving at night was the only way to feel like you were still moving, even if you didn't know exactly where. He looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. 2:16. Not a minute more, nor less, since he left his post in the previous city. He sighed and passed his hand over his face, trying to shake off the tiredness. The radio was off, not because it was broken, but because she couldn't stand hearing other people's voices anymore. Loneliness made more sense at that moment. The road always followed the same, surrounded by empty fields, with streetlights spaced too far apart, like missing teeth on a metallic body. Every now and then, an abandoned rural building appeared on the side of the road, but quickly disappeared in the rearview mirror, as if it had never existed. The woman adjusted the internal mirror, not out of necessity, but out of habit. No cars behind. No light on the horizon. Not even the stars were visible. The sky, heavy and opaque, seemed to press down on the roof of the car with an invisible presence. He thought about stopping. Breathe. Stretch your legs. But he continued. At one point, a sign appeared in the distance, illuminated by the beam of headlights. She squinted to read, "Toll 1 kilometer away." He frowned. I didn't remember any tolls on that stretch of road. I had been there before, several times in fact, and had never seen anything like it, but he didn't question it. After all, sometimes memory plays tricks. She continued driving slowly, and shortly after, the lights of a portico appeared on the horizon. A white portal, with a small guardhouse in the center, isolated in the middle of nowhere. No cabin next door, no clues around, just that lonely structure under the cold metallic vapor lights. The woman slowed down, the car sliding to a stop in front of the deserted toll booth, and then, for the first time in miles, he saw someone. Lone man, inside the guardhouse, waiting. Property, with his eyes fixed on her. The car stopped in front of the only illuminated cabin. The engine remained running, vibrating gently, but everything else seemed to have stopped. The road, so continuous and monotonous until then, now seemed to have stopped at that point. The white light of the toll booth created a perfect circle around the car, isolating it from the outside world. It was like being on a stage where silence was the only sound. The woman frowned, examining the structure. The toll booth looked old, not aged by time, but out of season, like a building brought from another decade. The cabin glass was very clean, no dust, no scratches. There was a metal sign above, with peeling paint, but without a name, without a price, without any guidance. No intercom button, no instruction plate, nothing. Just the man inside. He was standing perfectly straight, his hands crossed at his stomach. He wore a gray uniform, no logo, no badge, with a high collar and dark gloves that covered every inch of his skin. His face, illuminated from below by the interior lights of the cabin, seemed too pale, but it was difficult to tell whether it was due to the lighting or the nature of it itself. And the eyes. That was where the discomfort was. They were open, fixed, as if they hadn't blinked for a long time. They watched the woman with a disconcerting intensity, as if they were not just looking at her, but through her. She tried to keep her gaze steady, but she felt a slight shiver on the back of her neck, as if something inside her had reacted on instinct. No cars behind, none ahead. The world had reduced to that cabin, to that man, to that silent wait. She slowly rolled down the window. The air that came in was different, colder, drier. The conductor said nothing for a moment. Only then, in a very calm, almost robotic tone of voice, he said, "Good evening, ma'am. Before I go any further, I need you to look me in the eyes." The woman frowned. "How it is?" the man repeated. Same intonation, same time between words. "I need you to look me in the eyes." She hesitated. There was nothing there that made sense. No charges, no justification, no explanation as to why that toll booth was there. And yet, something in his mind obeyed. He raised his chin and faced the collector directly. His eyes, now so close, seemed too deep, like endless wells. The surrounding time slowed down. The sound of the engine became distant. The very air in the car's cabin seemed to become denser. And then, a sudden dizziness. Her vision wavered. A sudden dizziness, as if being pulled into those eyes. It only lasted a second, maybe less. But when he blinked and looked away, the man had already returned to his original position, hands crossed, face calm. "You can continue, ma'am," he said without emotion. She put it in gear and drove through the porch. But something in the rearview mirror made her look back. The toll booth was no longer there. The silence inside the car was absolute. The woman kept her hands steady on the steering wheel, but her fingers were beginning to sweat. The collector didn't move. The light from the cabin reflected in his eyes, giving them a glassy, almost inhuman shine. There was no emotion. There was no impatience. Just the repetition of the same phrase, with a voice that seemed to echo more inside her head than in her ears. "Look straight at me, ma'am." Before continuing your journey, she opened her mouth to question, to say that this was absurd, that no toll booth made that kind of demand. But the throat was dry, and somewhere deeper, where reason couldn't reach, a part of her already knew that this wasn't just any toll. With a mix of fear and curiosity, he slowly raised his eyes, and he faced his time stopped. At first, it was like looking at an ordinary person, but within seconds, the sensation changed. The collector's eyes seemed endless. They didn't reflect light like human eyes. They were deep, deep, and they moved. Not like pupils, but like there was something alive inside them, spinning in hypnotic spirals pulling her in. She felt her mind wavering. A buzzing went through his ears. A chill ran down his spine. And then, like an invisible pull, vertigo took over her completely. The surrounding road seemed to dissolve. For a moment, there was no more car, no cabin, no road. Just a dark void, a space without sound, without form. And in the middle of that, the eyes. They were still there. Observing. It was like crossing an invisible membrane. When consciousness returned, she was back in the car, with the engine running and her foot on the brake. The collector had stepped back, his hands folded as before, his expression unchanged. "You can continue, ma'am," he said with the same hypnotic voice. Without saying anything, she slowly accelerated, crossing the white concrete porch. He felt the car pass him as if passing through a denser, heavier wall of air. The steering wheel seemed to shake for a second. And then, everything went back to normal. Or almost. The road ahead was the same, but the sky seemed darker, more closed, the air more still. And something inside her, a feeling that grew every second, told her that it was no longer the same place as before. He looked in the rearview mirror, wanting to see the toll booth again, but he was gone. There was no sign of the booth, nor of the conductor, nor of the white lights, just the empty road, stretching behind, continuous and deserted, as if nothing had been there for minutes. She swallowed hard. He turned on the radio, trying to shake off the empty feeling. But what he heard was not music. It was his own voice. Recorded, paused as if speaking to another person. "You looked. Now see what has changed." The car continued forward, cutting across the road with the same fluidity as before, but the world around was no longer the same. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but like a crack growing in the glass, details began to emerge, one by one. And with every kilometer traveled, the woman felt the presence of something, out of place, something wrong, but on purpose, as if the place she had been led to was an imperfect copy of reality. The first billboard appeared on the right side of the road, erected between dry, motionless trees. There was no company brand or promotional image, just a dingy white background and a sentence written in black letters like fresh ink. "Are you where you belong?" She frowned, trying to remember if she had ever seen that ad before. But he didn't. Make sense. He continued driving, his heart accelerating slightly, his breathing becoming shorter. A second billboard appeared soon after, this time on the other side of the runway. "What you've seen, you've seen." The words were not dirty or scribbled. They were clean, aligned, as if they had been written for her, and for her alone. The radio turned on by itself, a crackle like static from old vinyl, and then his own voice echoed through the speakers. "Sometimes I think that no one really knows me, that if I disappeared now, no one would really notice." Her eyes widened. "What?" The voice on the radio continued. It was calm, intimate, a tone she recognized. It was exactly how she spoke when she was alone, thinking. They weren't recordings. It wasn't possible. They were thoughts. Thoughts she had never said out loud. "I wish I could drive to a place where no one would catch me. Just keep going, without remembering why." She turned off the radio on impulse. The button squeaked beneath his fingers. The silence that returned seemed even heavier, but she knew. That wasn't imagination. He looked at the panel. The clock showed 2:16. Yet. He began to take a closer look at the road. The trees looked doubled. Some with the same crooked trunk and broken branches were repeated at intervals that seemed rehearsed, as if someone had assembled the landscape in copied and pasted blocks. Another billboard. "Keep pretending. We're watching." She stepped on the gas. The road seemed narrower, the landscape more oppressive, the sky too dark, too heavy, as if it were slowly descending. And then the radio came on again, without touching the button. "You looked him in the eye. Now he sees through you." She hung up again, this time with force. But before the sound stopped completely, the voice, his voice, murmured one last sentence. "And when you come back, he will be waiting for you." The woman swallowed. He didn't respond, but I knew at that moment that I was too far to go back, and too close to escape. She spotted the first car just around a gentle bend. It was a dark sedan, gliding along the road ahead with smooth, regular movements, like any other ordinary vehicle. But something wasn't right. The woman slowed down, watching carefully. The back of the car looked very clean, no dirt, no scratches. It glowed unnaturally in the dim light reflected from her headlights, but what really made her frown was the interior. The car was empty. There was no one at the wheel, no body, no shadows, no reflection on the glass. And even so, the vehicle maintained its direction and speed, as if an invisible presence controlled it. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter. He tried to rationalize it. Could it be an automatic system, perhaps an autonomous car? But no. That model was old, and the way he walked, always at the same distance, without hesitation, was too strange. She looked into the opposite lane, another car, same pattern, no driver, and no headlights on. He slid beside her silently, like a ghost on rails. She started to see more, one after another, all apparently normal but without occupants. The empty seats, the motionless mirrors, no interior lights, no signs of life. It was as if they were there just to exist, not to be used. Her breathing started to become shallow. The radio, which had been turned off until then, started emitting static again. She turned the knob to change stations. Maybe some common music, something familiar, could reconnect her with reality. But all the stations were the same. They all transmitted indistinct sounds, muffled voices, and suddenly, again, her own voice filled the interior of the car. "You see, don't you? They don't have to look human anymore." She forcefully turned off the radio. He took his cell phone from the console and turned on the screen. Nothing. No signal. No connection. But the front camera turned on by itself. For an instant, the image showed his face. Sweaty, tense, illuminated by the car dashboard. She tried to hang up. The screen flickered, and then a new image emerged. It was her, but not in that position. The image showed his car from the outside, from above, as if it were filmed from somewhere over the road. She saw the hood, the roof, the headlights illuminating the road, and she herself, inside the vehicle, like a piece on a board. The image has changed. Another angle. Now it was from the side. It showed the car passing one of the billboards, the one that said, "Are you
Where you belong?"
She threw her cell phone on the passenger seat, her heart racing. But before he could think about stopping, another car came up ahead. No driver, and this time, in the passenger seat, there was something. Something that looked like a silhouette, property, looking directly at her. Even through the dark glass, she knew. I was being watched, studied, and that world, silent and copied, knew her better than she knew herself. Instinct spoke louder. The woman turned the steering wheel with a sudden and calculated movement, causing the car to skid slightly on the damp asphalt. The road didn't seem to allow for any U-turns, but she no longer cared. She didn't want to move on, not with billboards whispering phrases that seemed to know her, with radios that repeated her thoughts, with cars that moved without anyone at the wheel, or with someone who shouldn't be there. She needed to go back. I needed to go through the toll booth again. I needed to find the collector. I needed answers. The road back seemed longer, quieter. No music, no voice. The sound of the engine itself seemed muffled, as if everything was being filtered through. A thick layer of cotton. The clock still showed 2:16 property, immutable. He drove for minutes, or hours. Time had lost its meaning. And then, as if out of nowhere, the point where the toll booth should be appeared ahead. But something had changed. There was no longer any structure, nothing from the guardhouse, no plaque, no street lights, no sign of the collector. In place of all this, a single, lonely, and displaced structure, a mirror, high, wide, old, embedded directly into the asphalt, as if it had grown there. The frame was made of dark wood, cracked in places, as if it had weathered many years of neglect. The glass was smudged, slightly foggy, but reflected clearly enough. The woman stopped the car a few meters earlier. He left with slow steps, each one more hesitant than the last. He felt the weight of the air, thicker now, and a sharp buzzing. Inside his head, as if something was trying to invade his thoughts, she approached the mirror, and she saw herself. It was the same. Same outfit, same posture, even loose hair, slightly disheveled. But something was wrong. The reflection smiled, subtly, one corner of the mouth slightly curved, as if enjoying the confusion. The woman stopped, not breathing, staring at the image. He moved the fingers of his right hand, slowly. The reflection did not do the same. She turned her body slightly. He stepped to the side. He moved his head. Nothing. The reflection was still there, still, smiling. And then it blinked. A single, slow, calculated blink, as if to say, "I see you." The woman took a step back, her heart racing, her entire body on alert. But the reflection did not retreat. He remained motionless, maintaining that smile on the corner of his mouth that was almost human. But it wasn't. She turned her body and ran back to the car. When he looked back, the mirror was still there. But now, empty. No reflection, no images, just stained glass, framed by nothingness. The toll no longer existed. The collector was gone, and all that was left was that mirror and something, or someone, on the other side, who knew her face better than she knew herself. Panic settled like a tight lump in his throat. The woman walked back to the mirror with shaky steps, filled with irrational anger, a primitive impulse to defend herself, to react. That didn't make sense. The road, the empty cars, the conductor, the reflection that didn't obey, everything seemed to conspire against his mind, tearing certainties apart. She stood in front of the mirror, her fists clenched. "Enough," he murmured, his voice weak but determined. He took a step forward, raised his hand, and struck the glass hard. The impact reverberated through his arm like an electric shock. The mirror didn't break. He didn't even tremble. She struck again and again. He kicked the frame, pushed it with his shoulders. Nothing. The mirror seemed to be made not of glass, but of something that did not belong to the physical world, something that only pretended to be a surface. Panting, she stopped and placed her palm against the smooth surface, and at that exact moment, the world fell apart. Not physically, but inside her. The touch triggered a wave of vertigo that made her flinch, but her feet didn't obey. The sensation was of falling, but without movement. The mirror vibrated beneath her fingers, and she felt as if she were sinking into herself, being pulled back, inward, to places that were not spaces, but memories. Voices began to whisper around him. He recognized some. Your mother, your father, someone you hadn't heard from in years. But the words were wrong. The phrases overlapped, distorted, like old recordings played backwards. You always knew this place wasn't real. Why did you come back? Wasn't it enough to forget? The reflection saw you before you saw it. The images came in a whirlwind. Moments from his childhood, from the face of someone he loved, from hospital corridors, from an old photo album, from the car he was in now. But nothing was in the right order. The scenes shuffled, merged, overlapped like pages of wet books. She screamed, but the sound came out muted, drowned in echoes of voices that no longer belonged to anyone. For a moment, she saw herself in third person, outside the mirror, looking at herself leaning against the surface. The reflection now imitated her, but there was something in the eyes, an absence, an emptiness that seemed more authentic than her own gaze. And then, everything stopped. The woman fell to her knees in front of the mirror. The road was silent, unchanging. The mirror was still there, impenetrable. But now, his reflection had returned. He was standing, watching her, and smile. A wider smile. More confident. She slowly raised her face, staring at her own image with teary eyes. "Who are you?" he whispered. On the other side, the reflection's lips moved, but she heard nothing, just understood. Because the answer was not said, it was felt. She was no longer the only one there. The sound of the engine returned abruptly, like a punch of reality. The steering wheel under his hands vibrated slightly, and the car slid along the road as if nothing had happened. The woman blinked several times, trying to reorganize her senses. The mirror, the voices, the vertigo were gone. She was driving, alone. Again. The road seemed ordinary, at least at first glance. The traffic lights, the spaced posts, the dark sky. The radio, silent. No strange sounds, no intimate voice, no billboards with cryptographic messages. But something was wrong. She noticed it first in her hands. The position of the clock. The way the ring on her finger seemed out of place. She had always driven with her right hand firmly on the steering wheel, but now her left was in control, and it looked too natural, as if she had always been left-handed, as if something inside her had been changed without her realizing it. He swallowed hard. He looked at the panel. The time still read 2:16, frozen as always. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that this was just a remnant of what had happened, a sensory confusion. But then he saw the signs. The first appeared ahead, on the side of the road. It was blue, like all the others. with an arrow pointing to the right. But the name wasn't in Portuguese, and not even in English. They were symbols, letters that resembled the Latin alphabet, but were slightly distorted, like imperfect copies of something familiar, as if someone had tried to imitate human language and narrowly missed. The second sign was even more disturbing. The arrow indicated a return. Above was an incomprehensible sentence, but somehow she understood. He didn't read it, but he felt it. Don't go back the way you came. He's watching. She gripped the steering wheel tightly. His knuckles turned white. He looked in the rearview mirror and froze. Her reflection was still there. But he no longer followed her. The face in the mirror remained still, looking straight at the road, even when she turned her head to the side. They blinked at different rates. The expression in the mirror was blank, cold, as if it were a mask worn by someone, or something, trying to impersonate her. She tested. He slowly turned his face. He moved his lips. He raised an eyebrow. The reflection, nothing. He just watched, like the collector, like the reflection in the mirror. She was in the car, driving, but the certainty was clear. She had not returned to the real world. He had crossed something, a point of no return, a toll that was not charged with money. Now, it was part of another place, an inverted, mirrored reality where everything seemed correct, until you looked closely. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. She didn't know where it was going, but I knew one thing. Someone, or something, was sitting on the other side of the mirror. And now, I had control of the steering wheel too. The asphalt continued in a straight line without interruptions. The sky remained the same dark and motionless tone, as if time had stagnated at a point outside of reality. The woman no longer knew how long she had been driving. The clock on the dashboard was still stuck at 2:16, like a cruel reminder that time here didn't work the same way. She no longer tried to understand the billboards with incomprehensible words. I no longer heard the voices on the radio or tried to escape the cold image in the rearview mirror. Something inside her was beginning to accept it, and that's when he saw it. In the distance, a new toll booth. The structure was identical to the previous one. A white portico, lit by pale lights, with a single booth in the center. No queue, no other cars. The same feeling of being pulled to that place, as if I had no choice. But now, there was something different. She slowed down, her heart beating with a strange mix of anxiety and resignation. When he finally stopped in front of the cabin, his breath caught in his chest. In the illuminated glass window, there was her, not a look-alike version, not a distorted reflection, but exactly her. Same face, same posture, same serene expression. The only difference was in the eyes. There was something deep in them, a silent acceptance, a full awareness of what was happening. And then, the figure in the booth spoke, with the same voice. Calm, paused. "Good evening, ma'am. Before I continue, I need you to look me in the eyes." The woman in the car did not respond. She knew. I knew, in that instant, everything I needed to know. She was part of the cycle now. It was part of the space that existed between time. From the road that shaped itself based on thoughts, from the mirror that observed more than reflected, the figure in the booth held its gaze. The woman swallowed and looked at herself. The eyes that stared back at her seemed more alive than her own, and older. In the next instant, a chill ran through his body, and something inside her went dark. The steering wheel seemed further away. The air around you is denser. And then, without realizing how, she was already on the other side, inside the cabin, standing, with your hands crossed at the level of your abdomen, white light on your face, waiting. The road ahead was now seen behind the glass, and she knew it. At some point, a car would appear on the horizon, directed by someone tired, lonely, insomniac, who just wanted to escape reality for a while, and when that someone stopped there, she would say, "Good evening, sir." Before I continue, I need you to look me in the eyes. The cycle had closed, and now she was the one who would open the next one. The interior of the bus was enveloped in a calm, almost welcoming gloom. The small overhead lamps cast a yellowish glow over the narrow corridors, and the steady roar of the engine filled the air like an underground lullaby. Outside, the world passed by in dark blocks. Trees, distant lampposts, the continuous line of the road reflected in the headlights. Elias was in the armchair next to the window, with his face pressed against the cold glass. The light vibration of the bus transferred to his temple, creating a kind of uncomfortable but strangely hypnotic massage. He had a small backpack between his legs, and his coat folded in his lap. He was awake, but he barely felt there. It came from a farewell. His father's funeral in the neighboring city had robbed him of more than tears. It also took his sleep, his hunger, and the energy to interact with anyone. The last week had been a blur of formalities and uncomfortable silences. Now, the early morning bus was his bridge back to normal life. Although he wasn't sure if there was anything more normal waiting for him, few passengers occupied the vehicle. A gray-haired woman was dozing in the opposite row, her neck bent in a worrying way. A young man with headphones stared into space, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the window. 2 seats in front, a man was reading a small, very old book with yellowed pages. Nobody spoke. No one moved more than necessary. The driver was a silhouette, visible only by reflection, illuminated by the dashboard panels and the faint glow of a GPS strapped to the glass. The display showed the next stop, Posto Monte Alto, 0205. The environment was rhythmic, predictable. Each jolt of the bus on the track seams caused the same synchronized movement of the seats. The sound of tires sliding on the asphalt was repeated like a mantra. Elias looked out the window, but saw little other than his own pale expression reflected in the glass. He felt restless, but without knowing why. It wasn't exactly fear. It was anticipation. Something in the air seemed too focused, as if the night outside was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He tried to dispel the sensation with a sip of water and adjusted his position, avoided the cell phone. No signal. The network bar flashed like constant irony, and it was at that moment, as the bus advanced alone through that stretch of world forgotten by time, that a voice came from the speakers. "Attention, gentlemen. Passengers." A new boarding took place at the last stop. The voice was deep, formal, without emotion. Elias looked up, surprised. The last stop. He didn't remember the bus stopping. Not a sound of brakes, not a station light, not a new passenger walking down the aisle. He looked around. All the faces were in the same place. But a cold shiver ran down the back of his neck. Because somehow, there was now too much of a presence. The driver's voice echoed through the speakers in a dry, almost formal manner. Passenger boarding at the last stop. The sentence hung in the air for a few seconds, without being immediately absorbed. The roar of the engine remained the same. The headlights swept the dark road ahead, and the gentle rocking of the bus maintained the slow pace of the journey. Elias blinked a few times, trying to understand if he had heard right. He turned his head toward the hallway. Nothing had changed. The gray-haired woman was still sleeping hunched over, her head now lolling slightly to the other side. The young man with headphones kept his gaze fixed on the darkness of the window, completely oblivious to the announcement. The man with the book was still reading with the same calm, turning page by page, as if nothing else existed. But Elijah felt it. A slight discomfort, like a change in air pressure, as if someone had actually boarded but avoided being noticed. He looked at the benches at the back. They were almost all empty. The lights in that part of the bus were dimmer, almost bluish. Everything seemed the same, and yet the silence had taken on another texture, denser, more tense. He looked at the driver, or at least at the rearview mirror that reflected part of the man's face. The driver didn't turn around. I didn't say anything else. Elias leaned back in the armchair, suspicious. He could have been tired. He could have missed boarding time. Maybe someone had actually gone up silently during a discreet stop. But it didn't make sense. He didn't remember the bus braking. You won't feel the typical thump of the suspension when the door opens and closes. No roadside lights. No sound. Of footsteps in the hallway. And now, for the first time, he noticed the looks. The gray-haired woman had briefly awakened. He looked around with half-closed eyes, as if he was also looking for something he couldn't explain. The man with the book had stopped reading and was observing the corridor, his fingers still between the pages. The young man with the headphones looked at Elias slightly alarmed. There was no panic, but there was something shared. A collective feeling of estrangement. "Did you see someone go up?" Elias asked the young man in a low voice. He shook, his head not taking his eyes off him. "No." Elias looked at the back of the bus again. The darkness seemed to have swallowed part of the seats. It was as if, with each glance, that region seemed deeper, more distant than before. The gray-haired woman was now fully awake. He stared at the end of the corridor. I told you," she said softly. "Before, there were 7 of us. Now, there are 8 of us." Nobody responded, but everyone knew. Something, or someone, now occupied one of the seats, and no one saw him enter. The bus advanced slowly along the deserted road, and the silence among the passengers began to become unbearable. Elias, now fully awake, kept his eyes fixed on the seats in front of him. The gray-haired woman mumbled disjointed words, as if she were trying to remember something that refused to be remembered. The young man with the headphones had removed them, his eyes wide, listening for every sound. It was the man with the book who disappeared first. Elias noticed when he leaned forward, trying to get a better look at the hallway. The seat where the man had been sitting was empty, absolutely clean. The old book, previously always supported in his wrinkled hands, had also disappeared. No trace, no backpacks, jackets, or any items that suggested someone had been there minutes ago. "Where did he go?" Elijah muttered, more to himself but loud enough for the others to hear. The gray-haired woman slowly turned her head. His eyes were wide, his lips parted, as if he had just woken up from an endless nightmare. The young man next to him started to get up but thought better of it. Elias pressed the call button above his head, a dry click. No sound in response. A few more seconds of waiting, and then he stood up, walking down the aisle toward the front of the bus. The driver in profile looked at the road with a neutral expression, the steering wheel motionless under your hands, as if the vehicle was driving itself. "Excuse me," said Elias. "Did you see where the man in seat 4 went?" The driver did not respond immediately. He just blinked, slowly, before turning, his face back half an inch. "Which man?" "The elderly man. I was reading a book. He was there." Elias pointed to the empty seat. "Less than 5 minutes ago." The driver let out a light sigh as if he was bored with the question. No one was there. "Like this? We saw him. Everyone saw it." "You are mistaken. That person was never here." Elias stood still, trying to process the answer. The gray-haired woman approached slowly, her light footsteps on the bus carpet seeming absurdly loud in the silence. "Yes, he was," she said, looking intently at the driver. "I spoke to him when we went up. He helped me put my suitcase away." The driver did not respond. He looked back at the road as if the conversation had ended, as if the disappearance of a human being was irrelevant. And then Elijah noticed something else. On the side of the driver's dashboard, where there used to be a list of names typed on laminated paper, there was now just an incomplete sequence. 6 names. 8 people. But now only 5 names were visible. The one belonging to the man with the book had disappeared, as if it had never existed, as if he was being erased from the world, little by little. And Elijah felt a horrible certainty form within him. He would be next. The silence that dominated the bus was different now, denser, almost physical. It seemed to fill every corner, every gap between the seats. And as the vehicle advanced along the nameless road, the air inside the cabin became heavy, as if the atmosphere was being sucked away by something invisible. The overhead lights started to fail. First, there was a low, almost imperceptible crack coming from the back row. A lamp blinked twice and returned to normal. Then another, in the middle of the corridor, blinked again, but didn't come back. Darkness crept in, taking over the spaces between the seats like a warm, living fog. Elias watched everything with feverish attention. His body was still sitting, but his entire body was tense, as if every cell was on alert. The gray-haired woman muttered to herself, her hands gripping the arm of the chair so hard that her fingers turned pale. The young man with the headphones had closed his eyes. Not like someone who sleeps, but like someone who tries to erase the world around them. The reflection from the window was the next warning. Elias looked away from the corridor to the glass next to him and saw his own image, but it didn't follow him. His reflection was facing the back of the bus, staring at something that he, on this side, couldn't see. When he blinked, the reflection didn't blink. When it moved, the reflection stayed. And in the reflection, there was someone else, a figure behind him, tall, motionless, like a figure frozen in the shadows. Elijah turned quickly. Nothing there. But the reflection kept showing, that ghostly presence standing in the aisle, behind the seats. Too pale. Too dark. "We're stuck here," muttered the gray-haired woman without looking at him. Elijah slowly turned to her. "What did you say?" "They don't want us to notice, but we are out of the way, out of time, outside of what is allowed to be remembered." She ran her hand over her face, as if trying to hold on to something concrete. His eyes were shaking. The light above her flickered brightly, and then she disappeared. Not with a snap, not with a scream. It just wasn't there anymore. The bench next to Elias was now empty. No suitcases, no coats, no trace that it had existed. The young man in front slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Elijah with a frightened expression and whispered, "I dreamed that there was one more of me deep down, and he was awake. But I was me, and he was me too." Elijah didn't know what to say. Deep inside, the last row seemed darker than before. The light there never flickered, because it simply didn't turn on anymore. And there was a sound, far away, stuffy, something like steps, above the roof of the bus, as if someone was walking slowly from side to side, waiting for the next stop, waiting for the next name to disappear. Elijah fought to keep his eyes open, even as every muscle in his body begged for rest. The atmosphere inside the bus had become unbearably dense, as if the air itself was filled with sleep, a sleep that was not tiredness, but imposition. He rubbed his eyes, forced his spine straight, ran his hands over his cold face, and squeezed the side of his thigh tightly, trying to wake up, but nothing helped. Thoughts began to get confused, embarking on disconnected paths. The driver's words, the woman's disappearance, the reflections that didn't follow him. Everything was mixed together into disordered images. The faint humming from the roof of the bus grew into a collective whisper, as if something was speaking to him from behind his own consciousness. Elijah's eyes grew heavier and heavier. "Stay awake," he murmured. But the sentence didn't seem to have any weight. It evaporated into the air as soon as it was said. In an involuntary blink, a second, maybe less, the world changed. When Elias opened his eyes again, the bus was still moving, but he was no longer in the same place. Now he occupied a seat near the back, one he was sure he never chose. The window next to him showed no sky or road, just solid darkness, like a thick cloth stretched across the glass. The corridor ahead seemed narrower, longer. The surrounding seats were occupied by passengers he thought he recognized, but something about them was off. The young man with the headphones was now 2 rows away, looking at him with a blank expression, as if trying to understand who or what Elijah was. Behind, a woman occupied the armchair that had previously belonged to the gray-haired lady, but it wasn't her. The posture was too rigid, the face partially hidden by the shadows on the ceiling. Property. He glanced at the bench next to him. His backpack was no longer there. He found it 2 rows ahead, resting on the ground as if it had been left by someone else. The coat that had previously been folded in his lap was now on the floor, soaked, as if it had been worn outside, but he hadn't gotten off the bus. "Excuse me?" He tried to call the young man, but his voice broke. The young man looked at him, confused. "Which stop did you get on?" Elijah was silent. "The driver said he had one more now, that we should pay attention, that something new has entered." "I was here the whole time," Elias replied, more in defense than conviction. "He is sure?" He looked around. The faces turned slowly. No hostility. But there was something much worse. Indifference. As if they didn't recognize him as part of it. As if he were an intruder in a very old system. And there in the back, in the last row, there was someone sitting. He could barely see. The light didn't reach. But there was something, or someone, sleeping there, wrapped in the same coat, with the head hanging at the same angle. Elijah felt his own stomach sink. Because whatever was there, it was him, sleeping, as before, as if I never woke up. Elias staggered down the narrow aisle of the bus, his heart beating fast, as if something inside him had been thrown out of alignment. Each step felt more difficult than the last, as if the ground was resisting his passage. The gaze of the other passengers followed him in silence, not with concern or surprise, but with the coldness reserved for someone who clearly doesn't belong. When he got close to the driver's cabin, he held on to the back of the front seat, trying to organize his thoughts. The humming in the ceiling continued, almost imperceptible but constant, as if it was whispering a frequency that his brain couldn't decipher. "Sir, I need to know what's going on," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was sitting further forward. But when I woke up, I was somewhere else. My things were moved, and there's someone in the back of the bus. Someone who looks..." The driver didn't turn his face. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands on the steering wheel with the firmness of someone who had been driving for a long time, perhaps longer than he should have. "You boarded at the last stop," he said, with a calm that didn't sound human. "It's not on the list." "What do you mean I'm not on the list?" "I went in with the others at the bus station. I have the ticket, I have..." "You boarded at the last stop," he repeated more slowly. "Not one of ours." Elias felt the ground shake beneath his feet. An intense cold ran down his spine. He took a step back, shocked. The driver's eyes, reflected briefly in the rearview mirror, seemed deeper, darker. No shine. No emotion. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice now trembling. "I was there from the beginning. Everyone saw it, but no one responded." The woman who now occupied the gray-haired lady's old seat just lowered her eyes. The young man with headphones continued to watch but didn't say anything. The other faces, all still, all silent, as if they were waiting, and then Elijah turned around. He looked at the back of the bus. The dim light made it difficult to see clearly, but there, in the back row, he was. Your body, your face, sleeping, head hanging, coat on lap, breathing slow and deep. He froze. It was him. There was no doubt. Same outfit, same haircut, same detail on the side of his face that always bothered him. And at the same moment, he recognized him. The sleeping body moved. Didn't wake up. He just turned his face slightly as if dreaming. And for a second, Elijah swore that other him smiled. Not a smile of reassurance, but in possession, of permanence. The bus continued down the dark road. And now, Elias didn't know if he was still inside it, or if he had just been allowed to watch for a while. You boarded at the last stop. The phrase echoed like a seal, like a silent contract that he never signed, but had already been accepted. Elijah crossed the hallway as if he were walking against an invisible current. Each step was heavier, more difficult, as if the air around him was becoming too dense to breathe. The back of the bus seemed further away with every meter, as if space was stretching to stop it from reaching itself. The sleeping Elias remained there, in the last row, with his head pressed against the glass. The disheveled hair, the coat covering, the lap, the calm face, too calm. Elijah felt his heart race. There was something deeply wrong with that version of himself. When he finally reached the seat, he reached out and touched the other's shoulder. He agreed. No reaction. He shook harder. Wake up, please. It's me. It's you. But the body remained inert. Not even a jolt. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if he were in a deep sleep. But the eyes began to open. Elias took a step back, feeling his legs give out. His sleeping version's eyes were now open, but there was something wrong with them. They were dark, deep, and did not reflect light. A glassy, artificial shine. His gaze fixed on nothing, crossing Elias as if he didn't see him, as if he were now the reflection, and not the original. The bus shook. The overhead lights began to flicker violently, alternating between pale brightness and total darkness. The humming noise returned, louder, now seeming to come from inside. The bus itself, no longer a sound, but a living, pulsing frequency that made the metal vibrate. Elijah looked around. The windows stopped showing the road. In their place, reflections, but not the normal ones. They were multiplied versions of the bus, endless corridors, doubling in all directions. And inside them, different versions of the passengers. Some looked directly at him, others for distorted versions of themselves. He saw a version of himself in one of those windows, trying to leave through a door that didn't exist. He saw another, sitting in the driver's seat, with a smile fixed on her face, and her hands still on the steering. Wheel space began to fold in on itself. The corridor that Elijah had traversed now seemed to spiral upward, revolving around a central light. The sensation of movement ceased, but the bus was still moving forward. Or rather, something was advancing through him, and in the middle of it all, the sleeping Elias finally looked at him. Not surprisingly, not afraid, but with recognition, as if to say, "Now it's your turn." Elijah fell to his knees. The floor of the bus shook, but no one else reacted. The passengers remained, motionless as if frozen. The driver was no longer there. Everything was spinning. Time, space, identity, each concept dissolving like ink in water. Elijah tried to scream, but there was no more voice, and in the next instant, everything fell silent. He woke up in his old seat at the front of the bus, but no one looked at him. Nobody recognized him, and at the back, in the last row, someone was sleeping with their face turned to the window, with the same coat, and the same name. The wind cut through the dawn with an overwhelming silence. Elias opened his eyes slowly, feeling the damp cold of the asphalt beneath his back. The smell of wet earth, the metallic taste in his mouth, and the distant sound of tires sliding gently across the empty road were the first sensations that pulled him back into consciousness. Above, a starless sky. No streetlights, no cities around, just darkness and the sound of a bus engine pulling away. He sat up with difficulty, his head throbbing, as if he had slept for days and woken up in a place where he was no longer expected. As he looked ahead, he saw the bus's taillights slowly disappearing into the horizon. The red lanterns pulsed like eyes blinking goodbye. He tried to call, to scream, but his voice didn't come out. I was alone. He looked at his body, and a strange restlessness took over him. The clothes were different. He no longer wore the coat he had taken on the trip. Now she wore a thick, dark fabric jacket with a zipper she had never seen before. The jeans looked new, but fitted strangely, as if they had been made for someone else. The sneakers were old, worn out in a way that didn't belong to him. His heart sped up. He ran his hands through his pockets, looking for his cell phone, documents, anything familiar. Found something. A paper folded neatly in the inside pocket of his jacket. When he unfolded it, he immediately recognized the shape of a highway crossing. But the name printed there was not his. It was the name of the man who read the book, the one who disappeared first. Aloisio M. Brandão, Seat 4. The same seat. That now felt all too familiar. The handwriting was clear, printed by a machine. The boarding number, the city of origin, the time. Everything there, but no trace of his own identity. He staggered to his feet, watching the road around him. There were no signs, no shoulders, no sounds of nature. The world seemed suspended, like a space between two times, where there was only the echo of something that had just happened, or was about to start again. Elijah felt his eyes water, not out of fear, but understanding. The bus was not just a means of transport. It was a cycle, a crossing, and now he was outside, but not free. The ticket he held was not just a receipt. It was a brand, a warning, as if, upon waking up outside the bus, he had taken someone's seat or was waiting for a new one. The road before him was endless, but it didn't lead anywhere. And behind him, in the wake of the red lanterns, a new silence was born. A silence that whispered without words that the bus would soon return, and next time, he would no longer be a passenger. It would be part of the road. The interior of the bus remained enveloped in that same suspended silence, a silence that seemed conscious, as if it were listening to every thought, every heartbeat, every attempt at understanding of those still on board. The overhead lights vibrated in an almost imperceptible rhythm, like a mechanical pulse. The corridor seemed longer than before, as if the vehicle had extended inside, accumulating the time of those who never got off. In the last row, where the light never really reached, there were bodies, several, sitting, motionless, with their heads down or leaning against the dark windows, all with the same face, the same coat, the same serene appearance, a sleep that was not rest, but stagnation. They were versions of him, of the man who woke up on the road. Elijah, or what was left of him. Some versions looked older, with age marks on their faces. Others more recent, as if they were still assimilating the transition. There was the continuity of what was forgotten, the fragments of each person who embarked believing that the journey had a beginning, middle, and end. But the last stop is never the last. On the panel above the driver's head, a warning flashed in red. New shipment confirmed. The driver, his face reflected in the tinted glass of the cab, didn't say a word, but his eyes, deep, opaque, blinked with an almost ceremonial slowness. A new passenger had boarded. Maybe at some point where the road bends out of time. Maybe in a moment of extreme tiredness, in some early morning where reality falters. Maybe, as you read this, you think you're still safe. The list of names updates itself, and at the back of the bus, another seat is occupied. The new body assumes the position. The face touches the glass. The eyes slowly close. Outside, there is no longer a city, not even a bus station, not even home, just the road, infinite, curved, silent, and a vehicle that never stops running, that always finds someone else. Because the last stop doesn't exist. She just changes her name and wait.